Go where your best prayers take you, unclench the fists of your spirit and take it easy. Breathe deeply of the glad air and live one day at a time. Know that you are precious and learn to trust. Amen. Well, good morning to all of you. It's good to see you on this morning. And what I want to say to you first, I don't have a rehearsal for. I don't have notes for. It's kind of simply just noting a landmark, a very important one, in fact, a time mark, as it were, because this morning, as we start August, Rick is playing the organ, and in a few weeks, he's about to take vacation, but in a few weeks, between now and when his vacation ends, Rick will have been playing the organ for you and the people before you at St. John's for 50 years. Most of you haven't done anything for 50 years, so some of you don't even know about 50 years. Quite something, but we'll have plenty of time to really celebrate later next month. I want to tell you about a young woman named Emily, if you'll shift with me and think for a few minutes. Sweet young woman. She graduated from college. She was going to take a trip of her life. She was going to go see her sister who lives in Paris. And works there, saved her money, went, traveled. When she got to Paris, just a great trip. And her sister's working, so one morning her sister went off to work. She decided she'd go out and see Paris. And if you've ever been to Paris, you know the best way to see Paris is to go wander and see Paris and find yourself lost. And if you've been there, you know the experience. There is nothing like it. I mean, what a great city just to walk and sit and watch the cafes and walk by the river, and then there are museums everywhere. And she did that and thought she could find her way back near where her sister lived, and she kind of did, got in the district, and thought, and you know how Paris is often shaped, there are like squares, and then around the square there'll be an area, but there's kind of a center of each of those little areas. Well, she got kind of to the square, she thought, where her sister lived, and she couldn't place herself in where her sister's apartment was. So she thought, well, it can't be that hard. I'll just walk off each street off the square. Some of you may have done that. I've walked and done similar things. So she went down the first, went a long way, came back, nope. Went down the next one, long way, came back, nope. She did that all the way off of each street and realized, I have no idea where my sister is, and she didn't have her sister's cell phone and couldn't work the cell phone system in Paris. She's sitting there trying to figure out what she was going to do. So then she got an idea. There, in this district where her sister lives, is a famous mustard shop, and so she went and stood right in front of the mustard shop and got out her cell phone and called her mother in Des Moines, Iowa. And she said, do you have so-and-so, you have, Jan's number? Yes. Well, would you call her and tell her I am standing right here and then come and get me? And that's how she got found. Love that story. Only in today's world. But that story is you and me a lot in life. Because often we get lost. But most often the most troubling lostness that we have is when we get lost in the most familiar of surroundings. And it happens all the time. In fact, it is part of the life experience to be lost in the familiar in ways that we cannot imagine, and I'm convinced always surprise us. I heard a business consultant interviewed a couple of weeks ago. I was so compelled by the interview, I went and got his book and read it, And I'm going to tell you the story he told in this interview that was so compelling to me. He said he was working with a man in his 40s. He called him Sam so that he would protect his client's person, so that he wouldn't give him away, his identity. Sam is a self-made young man, smart, bright, energetic, quick learner, started his own tech business, and just made it go. And happily, very happily for all you business folks, someone bigger wanted to buy him. So they did, and he made a lot of money. So then he went to work for the bigger company. And that's when we start this real story. So there's Sam, who's always run his own small company and done exceedingly well and knows the business end of it backwards and forwards, no doubt. So he gets now in the new company that's way, way bigger, with lots more operational pieces going in lots of different directions. He's in way up in the senior management, but it's a new world. And so Sam does what you and I would do. He goes to work and does what he knows what to do. He works hard. He takes every assignment. He goes to every meeting. He answers every email probably almost before they're written. He is on every conference call. He goes out with his tech force when they're making sales calls. He's doing everything. And it's not long before he has this creeping sensation that he has made a vital, fatal error with his life. He's exceedingly unhappy. Very unhappy. In fact, the division he's over is not doing well. He's not doing well, they're not doing well. And he's at a meeting, and it's interesting, somebody way down the food chain from him, lower management, he kind of says something about struggling. And after the meeting, this young man comes up and says, Sam, I'm being presumptuous. I probably shouldn't say this. You're not asking for it, but you really sound lost. He said, I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't, but I think you need to figure out where you are in the company. And then it hit him. He really was lost. He was really, really feeling lost. Totally disconnected from this life that he had had. And again, he knows the business. He knows it really, really well. But he's not in the same place he was before. So he got some help from this business consultant. And he went back to work. But he went back in another way. He went back and he started stepping away from things a little bit. Slowly at first, built some momentum. He started delegating since he's in a big operation. He quit taking every assignment that came down the pike. It wasn't his job. He let others lead who needed to lead. He did not go to every meeting there was. He was not the first person. In fact, he became the last person on the email conversations. And he stayed out of conference calls that weren't his. And guess what? It got better really fast. He started feeling better really quickly. The obstacles that seemed to be in the way, the traction that he had lost, he regained. And but he felt guilty because he didn't feel like he was working at the level that he had always worked at. And what he realized he really was. He was working very hard. He was now just working smart. And he was also working in the way that his job called him to work. Productivity up, sales up, profits up. Sam was happier. Family was happier because guess what? Sam started going home on time. Started spending time with his children, going to their events. He even says in the book that he started working out and he had quit and started going to the gym 5 days a week. I am purposefully using an example that could be every one of you. Every one of you in whatever walk of life you're in. Every one of you has experienced what Sam has experienced. It is that sense of being lost and not knowing where you are. There is not one of you that has not been there. There is not one of you probably that won't be there a little bit again. It's not necessarily a lot of fun, but sorry, that's the topic for the day. And you know the reason? Because life moves on. Life is constantly changing. It does not stand still. It will not stand still for you. It does not stand still for me even when I want it to. And Sam had missed the lesson. like most of us, miss the lesson periodically. I know it makes me want to cry too. It really does. I swear it does. You see, life is changing even when we're unaware of it. And I think mostly we are unaware of it until we cannot be unaware of it. Life, I think, is a process of regularly having to figure out where we are. Life process is always trying to figure out, where am I? And the deeper question, who am I where I am in this new place? You know, Duke University did an amazing study a few years ago. And some of you may know of this study. It was quite remarkable. And it was kind of an interdisciplinary study. It was partly psychology, medical school, theological school. And what they were trying to grasp is how are we adjusting ourselves to the way life is and the way we live it? Because there's something about 21st century living that came out of the 20th century that is way different than people have ever experienced. There is no doubt about that. We can't say that enough. Technology-driven, speed-driven, efficiency-driven, success-driven. We've got something going that we've tasted before, but it's at another level. Duke thinks it's another animal altogether. So they studied it. And they came up with 8 or 9 little conclusions that they brought together. And they said that these were keys to emotional, mental, spiritual health and stability. They're things like this. Let me give you a couple. First on their list was get rid of all your resentments. That catch you by surprise? You thought it was going to be make another list, get a better computer. They said get rid of your resentments. How about number 2 on their list? Don't waste time on fighting conditions you cannot change. But what caught my attention about the Duke study was buried right in the center of their 8 little points was this one. It leapt out at me and hasn't turned me loose. Don't live in the past. Don't live in the past. It doesn't mean the past is not important. Those who don't know it and study it are doomed to repeat it in unfailingly unhealthy, unhelpful ways. But we don't live there, do we? We live here, now, this morning. We live for the future. It has always been said, by the way, a parenthetical thought, that the Gospels and Paul teach us that God is always the God of the future. We seem to think of God as always God of the past. But believe it or not, what I'm talking about this morning is literally what Paul is expressing in his letter today. And I know it's hard to hear because we jump to the gospel. That story is so kind of seminal for us. It's such an important story. But I want to shift you back and stay with Romans. I want you to hear again what Paul writes. Listen to what we just read. I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish. J.B. Phillips writes it this way. He's a great translator, by the way. He writes Paul's words and he says that they say more like this. I assure you that I am speaking the plain truth when I say that there is something that makes me feel very depressed, like a pain that never leaves me. You get that? That's not up here. That's down in here. That's viscera. That's where Paul writes us today. And what is all this about? Paul is struggling with where he is. No doubt about it. You see, he believes that Jesus is the Messiah. And what has that done? It has pulled him away, cut him away from his very roots. It has taken him from his Judaism. And that's not a head thought. He is a Jew. These are people, the people he's working with, they are his people. They are people he knows by name. He sleeps in their homes. He sleeps in their beds. He eats their food. This is very personal to him. These are friends and neighbors. See, let me try it again. Paul wants them to see what he sees. He wants them to have what he has, which is this powerful, magnificent sense of freedom. And then goes on to describe this all-embracing thing of grace that has changed his life. You see, he wants them to get unstuck. He wants them to have what he has, to find what he has found. But he cannot. And it's not easy for him. But don't miss Paul in this. Do you see, it's not easy for Paul to be living where Paul is. He is struggling where he's living. These are strong words. They are emotional words. They're way more emotional than they are thoughtful. These are emotions. I'm grinding here. He is also stuck in this new place. Let me try to give you an example. Any of you read Billy Graham's autobiography, Just As I Am? It's really wonderful. And Graham is no doubt, and somebody stopped me after church and said, "You ever meet him?" And I said, "No, I wish I had." And said, what we project is not what you meet when you're with him. He is really with you. He's down to earth and he's solid. And he has some wonderful stories, and this is one. He's always been pretty modest, takes a salary, keeps the business part away from him. He has no part of that. Takes a set salary. He's always lived in the same home, obviously same wife, very few vacations, works all the time. And he tells a story of when he and his wife got to go to the Caribbean. He had never been. And they stayed in a really kind of modest little place that was arranged by a clergyman that he knew from England. And the English clergyman had moved to the Caribbean and said, "Hey, I'll get you a little bungalow. Why don't y'all come and nobody will know you're here. You can really rest." So he took him up on it. Well, when they got there, he was out and about, and guess what? Word got out that he was on the island. And someone sent for him and said, "Would you please come to dinner? I'd like to treat you to dinner." He said he would. And when he got to the man's house, it was like half the island. And this wealthy American businessman had moved there and built this, we won't mention his name, this massive, massive complex. Graham turned and looked, and there was a yacht like the size of the house sitting there. There was a float plane. There was a helicopter on a pad. It was quite something to behold. They had a lovely dinner, just the man who's in his 70s and Billy Graham and his wife. About halfway through dinner, the man turned and looked at Billy Graham and said, "I am miserable." He looked out his yacht and everything. He looked back at Billy Graham and said, "I am miserable as hell." He said, "I can go anywhere I want." He said, "I have everything I've ever worked for." He said, in mega doses. He said, "I have everything that you would think would make me happy, but I am miserable." Well, for the next while, Billy Graham was so touched by it that he really talked to the man about his misery, about why he was there, and maybe kind of inching up on, not to fix it, but to, you know how it is, you've been there. You don't want to fix somebody's problems. That seems to reduce the magnitude of what they're feeling, but you want to reach out to them. I mean, reading it gave me the cringes, because I'm thinking, you almost kind of don't want to even be in the conversation. But he tried, kept going along, and then he finally kind of gently tried to suggest in a way, not a quick fix. I think we project that onto Billy Graham, that maybe God and spirituality might really help. He suggested to the man that he was having a spiritual problem. The man could not see it. Had no idea that what he was suffering was a spiritual malady, not anything else. That's not the end of the story. So they parted. Billy went back to his bungalow, and the English clergyman came over and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, you had supper with so-and-so?" "Yeah." He said, "Man, is that a play?" So they sat down and talked. This man is in his 70s. His wife had recently died. And they were just talking, and he said, "You really like it down here?" He said, "Yeah, I love it." He said, "I can barely afford it." He said, "Don't have any money." He said, "You probably don't know." He said, "My two sisters-in-law that were in England were both very ill, and they are now here, and I take care of them. And, I do this little mission thing. And he looked at Billy Graham and he said, "I am the happiest man in the world." I think the reason Billy Graham tells that story is not the proof text that, you get Jesus and everything sorts out. I'm not going to say that to you. I think it's that in a way, but something more powerful. That, I think Billy Graham understands that life is a spiritual journey. And it's got a whole lot of physical manifestations. A whole bunch of them. Of all kinds of stuff. Good and bad. Things that are pleasant and not. But actually, life is a spiritual journey. And somehow we didn't get that along the way. I think what Billy Graham was trying to offer the man is accepting God might actually help you understand where you are and accept yourself. And don't we believe that God loves us? Can't do anything to have him love us more? Do anything that he would love us less? And that somehow in God, when we find God, we find ourselves. And when we find ourselves, well, the door just stands right wide open. But you know what? Billy Graham knew he could not give that to that man. It's fascinating. So what do we do with all this? I mean, what do we do with all this? Well, I think one thing is to embrace the thought that the things about our faith happily, and I want to say happily, call us forward. You and I are being called forward from this moment. This is the moment you have right here, right now, with me. We have each other, we have this moment, and we do have a future. And yes, we have things to face. We always do. But we have that. And our faith is robust about embracing that reality. And you know what? When we embrace that, we aren't in the same place. It is about embracing it. It's about going with it. Because life is always changing. Time does not stand still for us. And there are examples all around us. I heard one this last week that was so wonderful. I guess we have a pretty serious problem with illegal immigrants coming to the United States. Not a joke. And the worst part of that problem for us and for the world is how many children are among them. Unaccompanied, left over, left out, being sent by their parents to survive. And they are on our shores. And we don't know what to do. That's pretty obvious. I don't know if anybody would. But I want to tell you about somebody who is doing something about it. His name is Juan Pablo. He does not live here. In fact, he's addressing our illegal immigration from his own side of the world, which is Guatemala. He's from probably a wealthy family. He's extremely well educated. He is a teacher. He is single, looks to be about late 30s. He's been teaching for a lot of years, and his despair has been growing about the conditions around him, particularly his students. The gangs, the drugs, the violence, and they are serious. And it's the very thing we're seeing. So he said, I finally decided I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to address this. And when asked, he said, my faith would not let me stand still and watch this. And so you know what he has done? He has taken them home. Now, not all of them, but he's taking them to his home. About 8 years ago, he took his family compound and he has turned it into a day center for all these children of the streets. It is one powerful thing to see. They come, most should be in school, often aren't. He gets out of school, he has other staff, but they come in the afternoon, they play games, they sing songs, they get a little attention. Sometimes they have to have a little medical attention. He feeds them a dinner always before he sends them home. Most live in poverty, have not enough food. He teaches, he is a preeminent teacher. Teaching, and modeling, and trying to get the older teenagers on track so that they will begin to model for the very youngest children. But listen to his own words. He says, in a violent country like ours, There is only weapon that we have at our disposal, and that weapon is God's love. He says, I'm about the business of helping these young people transform their lives so that they can transform their families' lives, and thereby we will transform the nation. You get what he's doing? He gets it. At any point in the journey, yours, mine, the kids from Guatemala, it doesn't matter. When we let God into that journey, something really changes. We don't only have us, we have God, and then we often have many, many people around us. Isn't that what we experience here? You can choose to go it alone, or you can choose to let this congregation and other people who will love you in with you. And boy, it changes the direction we live. You see, that process helps us find where we are, and often who we are where we are, which is terribly confusing at times. And then I'm going to use Juan Pablo's words. That's when life is transformed. It's not magic, it's transformation. And that's a different quality. And transformation is something that we hunger for, thirst for, long for, every one of us, at any point, and often at the most important points in this journey of life. You know, like Paul, I think we all want to give what we found. We really do. But I wonder if the best thing we might do is to begin to embrace this sense of life. Life is moving. I am moving. But you know what? God is always moving with you. And when people see that, they want that. And that, my friends, and I mean that dearly, is what transformation really is all about. Amen.